Hello everyone, welcome back to the Dark Fears family. Tonight we're hitting the endless highways where the real monsters don't always hide in the shadows. They ride with us. This is 10 new most disturbing true trucker horror stories. Truckers know the road better than anyone. But what they don't tell you is that the road sometimes watches back. Lonely gas stations, midnight rest stops, and stretches of highway so dark they feel like another world. These are places where reality bends and terror slips into the driver's seat. Imagine pulling over to an empty rest stop at 3 a.m. only to notice another pair of headlights already waiting for you, but no driver inside, or hearing footsteps across the roof of your rig when you're miles from the nearest town. So buckle up, Dark Fears family, because the road ahead isn't safe. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, tap the notification bell, and hit that like button if you enjoy the chills. Now, let's dive into the nightmares of the highway. My name is Daniel, and I've been an over-the-road trucker for almost 15 years. In that time, I've seen a lot. Long stretches of desert highway, snowstorms that nearly swallowed my rig whole, even the occasional accident that still haunts me. But nothing prepared me for what happened one night at a rest stop in rural Arkansas. It was late, just past 2:30 a.m., and I'd been driving for 12 hours straight. My eyelids were heavy, and I knew I needed to pull over before I fell asleep behind the wheel. The GPS showed a small rest stop just off the highway. Nothing fancy, just a couple of vending machines, a dimly lit bathroom, and space for maybe 6 rigs. When I pulled in, I noticed immediately that only one other truck was parked there. Its headlights were still on, but the engine wasn't running. I figured maybe the driver had just stopped for a bathroom break. But as I parked and cut the engine, something about that truck didn't sit right with me. It was too quiet, too still. I climbed out of my cab, stretching my stiff legs. The air was damp, carrying the faint smell of pine and something else I couldn't place. Something metallic, almost like rust. I grabbed my thermos and headed toward the vending machines. That's when I noticed it. The other truck's cab door was slightly open. Not much, just enough for me to catch a sliver of darkness inside. But what unsettled me most was the fact that the headlights were still blazing, throwing long beams into the woods beyond the rest stop. I told myself maybe the guy had stepped out for a smoke. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Halfway to the vending machines, I heard it. A faint tapping sound. Not from my rig, not from the machines. It was coming from the other truck. Slow, rhythmic, like someone drumming their fingers against glass. I froze. My eyes darted to the cab window. That's when I saw it. A pale face pressed against the glass, grinning at me. My body locked up, every instinct screaming at me to run back to my rig. But I couldn't move. The face wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. The skin was chalk white, stretched too tightly across the skull with dark hollows where the eyes should have been. Yet, I swear I could feel its gaze drilling into me. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the face slipped back into the shadows of the cab. The tapping stopped. I forced myself to breathe and tried to convince myself it was a prank, maybe another trucker messing with me. But when I looked around the lot, there was no sign of anyone. No footsteps, no movement. Nothing but the buzzing of the flickering rest stop lights overhead. I turned, ready to head back to my own truck, when the silence broke. The sound of the other truck's door creaking open echoed across the lot. I froze mid-step, my heart pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The other truck's cab door was wide open now, swaying slightly like someone had just climbed out, but the lot was empty. I swallowed hard and called out, my voice cracking. "Hey, you good over there?" No answer, just the faint rustle of wind through the trees at the edge of the lot. Then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The ground near the truck's steps, dark stains splattered across the pavement. They glistened under the buzzing lights, thick and sticky. I knew immediately it was blood. A wave of nausea hit me. I backed up slowly, not daring to turn my back on that truck. I needed to get in my rig and get the hell out of there. But just as I reached for my door handle, I heard it. Footsteps on gravel. Slow, heavy, getting closer. The footsteps crunched closer, slow and deliberate, like whoever or whatever was moving wanted me to hear. I spun around, scanning the lot, but there was nothing. Just shadows stretching unnaturally long beneath the flickering rest stop lights. My truck suddenly felt like the only safe place in the world. I yanked the door open and climbed inside, slamming it shut, locking it with trembling fingers. I pressed my back against the seat, trying to convince myself I was safe. But then, the footsteps stopped. The silence was worse. I peered through the windshield. The other truck's door was still wide open, swaying gently. The bloodstains seemed darker now, as if fresh. My chest heaved, panic rising, when a sound broke the stillness. A low whistle. Not a normal whistle. It was long, drawn out and broken, like air forced through ruined lungs. It echoed across the lot, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. And then I saw him. A tall figure stepped out from the shadows near the other truck. His frame was wrong, too thin, arms dangling too low, head cocked unnaturally to the side. And though I couldn't see his face clearly, I knew without a doubt it was the same pale figure I'd glimpsed in the cab. The figure moved slowly, each step dragging like its legs didn't fully work. That whistle kept going, broken and hollow, carrying through the cold night air. I tried to start the engine, but my hands were shaking so violently that I dropped the keys. They clattered against the floor, impossibly loud in the suffocating silence. When I bent to grab them, I made the mistake of looking back up. The pale man was closer, much closer, standing only a few feet away from my truck's hood, his head tilted forward like he was studying me. His face. God, I'll never forget that face. Skin stretched too thin, lips torn into a permanent grimace, empty sockets where eyes should be. Yet I could feel him seeing me. I shoved the keys into the ignition and twisted. The engine roared to life, breaking the silence. Relief flooded me, until I heard it. The passenger side door handle rattled. He was trying to get in. I slammed my weight against the lock, making sure it held, while his long fingers scratched against the glass. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard, shrill and endless. His face pressed against the window, leaving a foggy smear as that broken whistle rose louder. I floored the gas, tires squealing against the cracked asphalt. My truck lurched forward, nearly fishtailing as I tore out of that cursed rest stop. In the side mirror, the pale figure shrank into the distance, standing motionless in the pool of flickering light, still whistling that broken tune. I didn't breathe until I was miles down the highway. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it might stop. Finally, I pulled over at a small diner, lit up like a beaconess in the dark. Normal people inside. Laughter, warmth, civilization. I stumbled in, pale and sweating, and collapsed into a booth. The waitress asked if I was okay, but the words stuck in my throat. How do you explain that something inhuman just tried to climb into your cab? I stayed there for hours, sipping coffee, convincing myself it was over. But when I walked back out to my truck, I froze. On the passenger side window, where his face had pressed against the glass, was a smeared handprint. Too long, too crooked, burned into the condensation like it had fused with the glass. I tried to wipe it away with my sleeve, but the handprint didn't fade. It was etched into the condensation, almost like it had stained the glass itself. My gut twisted, warning me to leave. I drove for hours, refusing to stop again. Every time headlights passed in the opposite lane, I jumped. Every shape on the roadside looked like him, just waiting. By dawn, I was a wreck. Exhaustion tugged at me, but I knew better than to stop. I kept going until I reached a way station with plenty of other truckers around. Safety in numbers, I told myself. When I finally parked and stepped out, one of the older truckers gave me a strange look. He pointed at my rig. "Rough night?" he asked. I turned to see what he meant. My stomach dropped. Along the side of my trailer, stretching from front to back, were streaks, finger-like smears of grime dragged across the metal, as if something had been clinging to it while I drove. That was the moment I realized the truth. I hadn't left him behind. He had followed me. The streaks were proof. But what chilled me more was how quiet the other truckers suddenly became, like they'd seen this before. One older driver muttered, "Not again," and walked away. No one asked questions. No one wanted to. That night, I parked in a well-lit truck stop, deliberately choosing a spot near the store entrance. I barely slept, eyes darting to every shadow. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of tapping, slow, rhythmic, on the glass. I sat frozen, every muscle locked. The tapping moved from the passenger window to the windshield. Then came the whistle, that same broken tune, faint but undeniable. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it away. When I opened them again, the windshield was clear, empty. Just the night staring back at me. But then I noticed the smear, a long, wet streak across the inside of the glass. That was the last straw. I abandoned my route, called my company, and told them I was done. They thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. I left the rig at the nearest drop yard and swore I'd never drive long haul again. But sometimes, even now, I still hear it. That whistle, broken, hollow. I've heard it walking home from the store at night, echoing in parking garages, even once outside my apartment window. Always faint, but always there. I know what it means. He's still following me. And every time I see a long smear on glass, I wonder if tonight's the night he'll finally get inside. So, if you're ever driving cross country and you see an abandoned truck at a rest stop with the door wide open, don't go near it, because he's waiting. My name is Alex, and I've been a long-haul trucker for over a decade. I thought I had seen it all. Isolated highways, treacherous weather, and the occasional strange encounter. But nothing prepared me for the night of the midnight convoy. I was hauling a refrigerated load across the Appalachian backroads at 2:30 a.m. The roads were eerily silent, except for the hum of my engine and the occasional rustle of wildlife. The fog had rolled in thickly, curling around my cab, and my headlights barely penetrated the gloom. Hours in, I noticed headlights in the distance, trailing me. Another truck, I thought. But as the distance closed, I realized this wasn't an ordinary driver. The truck had no license plates, its body rusted and dented, and its headlights burned an unnatural red. As it drew closer, I realized there were more trucks behind it, an entire convoy, perfectly aligned, following me as if orchestrated by some unseen hand. My chest tightened. I had no radio contact, no nearby highways, and the GPS wasn't recognizing the road. The trucks weren't just behind me, they were everywhere, appearing from the fog as if the night itself had birthed them. I tried to signal the lead truck, flashing my lights and honking. Nothing. The convoy mirrored my movements, every truck perfectly synchronized, yet silent. My radio crackled with static, then a faint whisper emerged. "Do not escape. Join us." I felt an icy chill run through the cab. The temperature dropped suddenly, frost forming along the windshield. My breath fogged up the glass as if the air itself had turned against me. The road twisted unnaturally, uphill, downhill, then flat again. But the trucks never faltered. I realized with horror that they weren't driving. They were gliding, moving with purpose beyond human control. Suddenly, a shadow darted across the highway. Another trucker? No. Something taller, thinner, and impossibly fast, slipping between the spectral rigs with jerking, unnatural movements. I slammed on the brakes. My tires screeched against the asphalt, yet I was moving faster than I should have been, drawn forward by an invisible force. The whispers grew louder, and I understood. The midnight convoy wasn't chasing me. It was corralling me, preparing me for the inevitable. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I realized something even more terrifying. The trucks weren't empty. Shadows shifted inside the cabs, and faint, glowing eyes peered out at me, dozens of them, all staring, unblinking. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like marionettes being controlled by some unseen puppeteer. I tried to call dispatch, but my radio screeched with static. Then a distorted voice whispered my name, dragging it out in a way that made my blood run cold. My headlights flickered, casting warped shadows across the foggy highway. And in those fleeting moments, I swore I saw figures climbing onto the roofs of the trucks, crawling silently toward me. Every instinct screamed to escape. But the road itself seemed to warp around the convoy, curving impossibly, narrowing as if the forest wanted to swallow me whole. The hum of the engines wasn't normal. It was a low, vibrating chant, resonating through my chest, synchronizing with my racing heartbeat. I knew I wasn't just being followed. I was being hunted. And the midnight convoy had no intention of letting me leave alive. I glanced in my rearview mirror and froze. One of the spectral trucks had drifted closer, impossibly close, its engine silent yet radiating a malevolent energy. A pale hand pressed against the windshield, sliding downward, leaving streaks of frost and shadow. I tried to accelerate, but the truck hesitated, as if trapped in a viscous force. The convoy wasn't just chasing me, it was merging with the road, with reality itself, pressing me toward some inevitable confrontation. The hand withdrew, and then the front of the truck blinked out of existence, replaced by a nightmarish visage. Hollow eyes, jagged teeth, and smoke curling from empty sockets. The whispers became screaming voices, chanting in unison, "Join us, forever." I slammed my fists on the wheel, desperately trying to break the spell. Then, unexpectedly, a single beam of moonlight pierced the fog, illuminating a sign. "Rest stop 42 miles ahead." My mind clung to it like a lifeline. Maybe I could escape, maybe I could survive. I floored the accelerator, the cab shuddering violently as if resisting me. The convoy reacted instantly, perfectly synchronized, matching my speed with impossible precision. Trees whipped past, branches clawing at the cab like skeletal hands. Then I noticed a figure on the road ahead. A man, or what looked like one, standing perfectly still. But as I got closer, I saw his features. Hollow eyes, a skeletal grin, and hands reaching unnaturally long toward the truck. The carvings on my cargo box, which I hadn't noticed before, began to glow faintly. They pulsed in rhythm with the chanting of the convoy, illuminating symbols I couldn't understand, etched deep into the metal. My chest tightened. A shiver of premonition crawled up my spine. I realized that this was no ordinary convoy. They weren't just lost spirits, they were predators, and the highway was their hunting ground. If I didn't act fast, I would become part of it. The fog around me thickened until my headlights barely illuminated the road ahead. Every turn seemed endless, every mile impossible. The convoy pressed closer, their red headlights glowing like malevolent eyes. I could hear the metal of the trucks groaning and scraping against some unseen surface, a sound that made my teeth ache. The chanting grew louder, almost deafening, vibrating through the cab and into my bones. The carvings on my cargo now blazed like a warning, pulsing in sync with my heartbeat. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Another truck had materialized directly behind me, impossibly close. Its driverless cab leaned forward, as if sniffing me. Shadows crawled along the asphalt, twisting unnaturally, reaching for my wheels. Every instinct screamed to stop, but my foot wouldn't obey. The midnight convoy had taken control. It was no longer a pursuit. It was a war of wills, and I was losing. The CB radio exploded with overlapping voices, hundreds of them, screaming, laughing, crying, whispering. They were my name, calling me, taunting me, warning me. Each word struck my mind like a knife. I tried to shut the radio off, but the static became louder, more insistent. Then I saw figures climbing onto the trucks from the fog. Hulking, twisted silhouettes with hollow eyes, faces twisted in silent screams. I realized the convoy wasn't just a threat, it was alive. Each truck seemed to have a consciousness, a hunger. The carvings on my cargo glowed brighter, reacting to the terror around me, feeding the spectral convoy. I gripped the wheel with shaking hands, realizing the only way out was to face the horror head-on. But as I drove, the road itself warped, bending into impossible angles, leading me deeper into the nightmare. The road became a tunnel of darkness. The fog pressed in, and the trees leaned like towering sentinels. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing, mixing with the relentless drone of the convoy engines. Then I saw it. A massive gap in the asphalt ahead, black as obsidian. The lead spectral truck hovered at the edge, its red lights glaring like a warning. My cab trembled uncontrollably, and the carvings on my cargo erupted in blinding light, almost as if warning me to stop. But it was too late. The convoy had me trapped. Every truck pressed forward, the shadows of the drivers stretching into monstrous shapes. Whispers turned into screams, and the fog formed twisted faces, shrieking silently as if mocking my fear. I tried reversing, turning, even braking hard, but the midnight convoy dictated my movements. I realized then, survival wasn't guaranteed. The road was hungry, and I was its prey. With every ounce of strength, I twisted the wheel, desperately trying to swerve the cab away from the abyss. The trucks reacted instantly, blocking every possible escape route. Shadows reached inside the cab, icy fingers brushing against my arms and face. Then, I noticed a single point of light ahead, a faint moonbeam piercing the fog. My mind clung to it. I floored the accelerator, praying it would be enough. The carvings blazed violently, and the convoy seemed to hesitate, recoiling slightly as if struck. The gap in the road widened. I felt my stomach drop, the truck teetering on the edge. The whispering voices grew frantic, almost pleading, urging me to join them. I closed my eyes, gripping the wheel, and drove straight through the moonlit patch. When I opened my eyes, the gap was gone. The fog had thinned, the convoy vanished, and I was back on a familiar stretch of highway. But the glow on my cargo remained, faintly pulsing, reminding me that the nightmare wasn't over. I parked at the nearest rest area, shaking, sweat and frost mixing on my skin. The carvings on my cargo still pulsed faintly, and a low hum echoed inside the cab. I told myself I had survived, but the memory of the midnight convoy never leaves. Even now, years later, whenever I drive the back roads at night, I see distant red headlights in the fog, perfectly aligned, watching, waiting. The midnight convoy is patient. It doesn't rush. And one day, it will return for anyone who dares travel alone on those forgotten highways. I never drove that route again. And I warn every trucker I meet, some roads aren't meant to be traveled, and some nightmares ride alongside you, invisible yet eternal. My name is Jason, and I've been a long-haul trucker for over 15 years. But nothing in my career prepared me for the night I took the old highway through the Appalachian backwoods. The assignment seemed simple: deliver a refrigerated load to a small town I'd never heard of. GPS struggled to find the route, warning me that this stretch was unmaintained. But the pay was enormous, too good to refuse. The road itself was narrow, flanked by thick forests, and shrouded in a mist that never seemed to lift. I could barely see past my headlights. The further I drove, the heavier the air became, thick with an almost tangible presence, as if the woods themselves were watching. Hours passed. The silence was broken only by the truck's engine and my own ragged breathing. Then, suddenly, a figure appeared in the center of the road, a man limping, wearing tattered clothes, face pale and expressionless. I slammed the brakes. The figure vanished instantly. No sound, no trace, just empty road. My chest tightened. Something wasn't right about this highway. Something didn't want me there. I pressed on, trying to shake off the encounter. But soon, another sight froze me in my seat. A rusted old car parked on the side of the road, engine running, lights flickering, yet no driver inside. As I slowed, the air grew colder. Frost formed on the windshield in strange patterns, almost like hands pressing against the glass. I tried to radio dispatch, but static swallowed every attempt. Then the car's lights flickered and went out. My heart raced as a shadow moved in the woods beside the road. Not an animal, not a person I recognized. Something tall, thin, and impossibly fast. I sped up, gripping the wheel. The fog thickened, coiling around the truck like a living thing. I realized this stretch of road wasn't just isolated, it was alive, and it was hungry. The fog thickened so much that even my high beams barely penetrated it. I tried to steady my breathing and calm my racing heart. Then, my CB radio crackled violently. Static at first, but soon a voice emerged. Low, guttural, almost distorted. "You shouldn't be here. Turn back." I froze. No other truckers were on this route, and dispatch hadn't called me in hours. My hands shook on the wheel as the voice continued, fragmented words repeating, "The road. Takes the lost." I tried speaking into the mic, but only my own voice echoed back, distorted and slowed, like a whisper from the abyss. My truck vibrated unnaturally, as if something under the chassis was moving. Suddenly, a figure darted across the highway. A man in tattered clothing, eyes black voids. I swerved, barely avoiding him. The CB crackled again, louder. "Jason, it sees you. It always sees..." Panic surged. I realized the fog wasn't just fog. It was a living thing, carrying the whispers of every lost traveler, every ghost trapped on this cursed highway. The fog now seemed solid, pressing against the truck like icy fingers. I could barely see the road beneath my wheels. Every mile felt longer, as if the highway itself was stretching, twisting, leading me deeper into the woods. Shadows moved along the trees. Silhouettes of long-dead truckers, their faces frozen in silent screams. One reached out, and for a horrifying moment, I swore I felt a cold hand brush my arm. The temperature dropped sharply. Frost formed on the dashboard, spreading across the gauges. The carvings on the wooden panels of my truck seemed to twist and pulse in rhythm with the whispers. Then I saw it. A dark shape in the middle of the road, enormous, its eyes glowing faint red. The CB radio screeched, then went dead. My engine roared, tires skidding, yet the figure remained, moving closer with each heartbeat, unmoving yet advancing. An impossible paradox that made my stomach churn with fear. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The road ahead began to warp, twisting unnaturally like a ribbon floating in the fog. Trees leaned inward, their branches stretching toward the truck like skeletal arms, scratching against the cab. The shadowy figure stayed in the center of the road. But as I tried to steer around it, the highway itself bent, redirecting me back toward it. The fog was alive, thickening with every heartbeat, whispering my name over and over, echoing in the cab like a chorus of the damned. I tried to brake, but the pedals ignored me. The truck accelerated instead, as though possessed. The red eyes of the figure burned into my soul, filling my mind with visions of accidents, crushed vehicles, and twisted metal. Then the CB radio flickered back to life. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was laughter, low, hollow, and cruel. My chest tightened. I realized with horror that I wasn't on any normal highway anymore. I was trapped on a phantom road, existing somewhere between the living world and the dead. Suddenly, headlights appeared in the fog behind me. Relief surged. Maybe another trucker could help. But as they got closer, the figures behind the wheel were wrong. Pale, expressionless faces, eyes hollow and black. They didn't signal, didn't slow. Their trucks glided silently, shadows merging with the fog. One passed me, its horn blaring an unnatural, distorted note that rattled my teeth. My truck shuddered violently, struggling to stay on the road. Then I noticed the logs in my truck's bed, the cargo I'd been hauling, were no longer just frozen goods. Strange carvings glowed faintly, pulsating with the rhythm of the phantom vehicles around me. A voice hissed from the back of the truck. "You are not alone, and you never will be." The lights behind me multiplied. Ghostly rigs swarmed, surrounding me. I realized this wasn't an accident. I had entered a trap, a highway designed to hold the souls of those who dared to drive too far into the night. The whispers from the fog became a cacophony, overlapping hundreds of voices at once. Each syllable echoed inside my skull, making it impossible to think clearly. Join us. Stay forever. Lost. I slammed on the horn, hoping to break the trance, but the sound was swallowed by the fog. Every turn of the wheel felt predetermined, as if some invisible hand guided the truck along a path I could not control. A shadow loomed beside the cab, taller than any human, its form flickering, half material, half mist, its hand pressed against the window. My reflection in the glass was wrong, hollow eyes staring back at me, smiling in terror. Then a figure appeared directly ahead, blocking the road completely. A former trucker, I realized, one of the lost souls, standing unmoving, arms outstretched. The carvings on my cargo pulsed violently, reacting to its presence. I knew with bone-deep certainty. The phantom highway had claimed countless lives before me, and I was next unless I found a way out. Fast, the road became a tunnel of darkness. The fog pressed in, and the trees leaned like towering sentinels. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing, mixing with the relentless drone of the convoy engines. Then I saw it. A massive gap in the asphalt ahead, black as obsidian. The lead spectral truck hovered at the edge, its red lights glaring like a warning. My cab trembled uncontrollably, and the carvings on my cargo erupted in blinding light, almost as if warning me to stop. But it was too late. The convoy had me trapped. Every truck pressed forward, the shadows of the drivers stretching into monstrous shapes. Whispers turned into screams, and the fog formed twisted faces, shrieking silently as if mocking my fear. I tried reversing, turning, even braking hard, but the midnight convoy dictated my movements. I realized then, survival wasn't guaranteed. The road was hungry, and I was its prey. With every ounce of strength, I twisted the wheel, desperately trying to swerve the cab away from the abyss. The trucks reacted instantly, blocking every possible escape route. Shadows reached inside the cab, icy fingers brushing against my arms and face. Then, I noticed a single point of light ahead, a faint moonbeam piercing the fog. My mind clung to it. I floored the accelerator, praying it would be enough. The carvings blazed violently, and the convoy seemed to hesitate, recoiling slightly as if struck. The gap in the road widened. I felt my stomach drop, the truck teetering on the edge. The whispering voices grew frantic, almost pleading, urging me to join them. I closed my eyes, gripping the wheel, and drove straight through the moonlit patch. When I opened my eyes, the gap was gone. The fog had thinned, the convoy vanished, and I was back on a familiar stretch of highway. But the glow on my cargo remained, faintly pulsing, reminding me that the nightmare wasn't over. I parked at the nearest rest area, shaking, sweat and frost mixing on my skin. The carvings on my cargo still pulsed faintly, and a low hum echoed inside the cab. I told myself I had survived, but the memory of the midnight convoy never leaves. Even now, years later, whenever I drive the back roads at night, I see distant red headlights in the fog, perfectly aligned, watching, waiting. The midnight convoy is patient. It doesn't rush. And one day, it will return for anyone who dares travel alone on those forgotten highways. I never drove that route again. And I warn every trucker I meet, some roads aren't meant to be traveled, and some nightmares ride alongside you, invisible yet eternal. My name is Tyler, and I've been driving trucks for over a decade, hauling everything from construction supplies to livestock. But nothing in my career prepared me for the job I got last winter, deep in the Appalachian Mountains. I received a call from a small logging company in a remote town. They needed someone to deliver a massive load of timber to a lumber mill over a stretch of road no GPS would recognize. The pay was absurdly high, but something in the voice on the other end of the line sent a chill down my spine. Calm, friendly, but with a hint of something lurking beneath. I didn't think much of it at first. A high-paying winter route in the mountains sounded like a perfect job. But the moment I pulled the truck out of the lot, I noticed strange carvings etched into its wooden sides, symbols I couldn't understand. They seemed old, jagged, almost alive under the flickering glow of the headlights. I shrugged it off as local superstition. I had miles to cover, and I wanted to get the job done. But the mountains had other plans. The road into the mountains was nothing like I'd ever driven before. Narrow, twisting, and slick with ice and snow, flanked by dense forests that blocked out the moonlight. Every turn felt like it could drop me into a ravine. Hours passed. The wind howled through the pine trees, rattling the truck as if it were alive. Then I heard it. A scraping noise like metal or bone dragging along the asphalt behind me. I slammed the brakes, spun around, and nothing. Just my rig, the road, and the endless trees. I tried to focus on driving, but the feeling of being watched grew heavier with every mile. The carvings on the truck seemed to catch the moonlight now, shadows writhing across the wood as if reacting to some invisible presence. I reached for the CB radio, hoping to hear another trucker on the route. Static, nothing but static, and faint whispers I thought I imagined. The mountains were quiet, too quiet. And I knew I wasn't alone. As I crested a bend in the mountain road, the headlights caught something moving ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer, but no animal could have stood so still, framed perfectly in the road, its head turned toward me. Then I saw its eyes, pale, glowing like molten amber in the dark. I slammed on the brakes, but the figure didn't move. It just stared, unblinking, as the wind howled around us. My heart pounded, my hands shook uncontrollably. Then it stepped aside, or vanished. I wasn't sure which. The road was empty again, but the air felt thick, suffocating, like I'd inhaled smoke from 100 unseen fires. I glanced at the truck, and the carvings on the logs seemed to pulse slightly, as if the truck itself had sensed something too. I tried to laugh it off. Just a deer, just a trick of the light. But then I noticed footprints, impossibly large, clawed prints pressed into the snow behind the truck. They weren't mine, and I had no one to call. No cell service, just miles of empty road and the whispering trees. I needed shelter, a place to regroup and calm down. I spotted an old logging cabin off the road, its roof sagging under the snow. Smoke puffed weakly from the chimney, but there was no sign of life. I approached cautiously, boots crunching in the icy snow. The door creaked open before I even touched it. Inside, the cabin was furnished, but everything looked wrong. The furniture was covered in layers of dust, yet freshly broken twigs littered the floor. On a wooden table sat a photograph, a man in a truck, smiling, identical to mine. Only his eyes were black. The carvings on the logs seemed to match symbols etched into the walls of the cabin. I backed away, feeling the temperature drop sharply. My breath formed clouds in front of my face. The cabin seemed to shift subtly, expanding and contracting like it had a pulse. And then, from somewhere deep inside, I heard scratching, nails against wood. Moving closer, the scratching grew louder, echoing in the corners of the cabin, vibrating through the wooden floors. My heart raced, and my mind screamed to run, but something kept me rooted to the spot. I couldn't tell if it was curiosity or terror. Then I saw it. Shadowy fingers pressing through the wooden walls, bending the planks outward as if something wanted out. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair, and the noise made the scratching stop. Silence. But then a whisper, faint and raspy, filled the room. "Tyler, you shouldn't be here." I spun around, but there was nothing. The air felt thick, sticky, like I was breathing in shadow itself. Panic took over, and I bolted outside, into the freezing wind. The snow crunched under my boots, and when I glanced back, the cabin door slammed shut on its own. As I ran toward my truck, I noticed the carvings on the logs glowing faintly. I realized, with a sickening feeling, that the symbols weren't just decorative. They were warnings, or curses. And they were waking something. I reached my truck, panting, expecting safety. But the keys weren't in the ignition, and the engine was already running. The truck shivered as if alive, its headlights flickering, casting long, writhing shadows across the snow. I opened the door slowly, hesitating, and the seatbelt fastened itself. The carvings on the logs glowed brighter, pulsing in rhythm with the engine's rumble. Then I felt it, the steering wheel shaking violently in my hands, as if unseen fingers were guiding it. The truck lurched forward. I tried to brake, but the pedals ignored me. Every instinct screamed that I was no longer in control. Outside, the mountains blurred and the trees warped, bending unnaturally toward the road. A voice, deep and hollow, emanated from the truck itself. "The road is ours. You only drive it." I gripped the wheel, powerless. The haunted truck was no longer just a vehicle, it was a predator. The highway disappeared. In its place was a black tunnel stretching endlessly, walls alive with pulsing carvings, shadows crawling along the asphalt. I tried to turn, but the truck followed the tunnel's curves as if it had a mind of its own. Figures emerged from the shadows, ghostly loggers, black-eyed and skeletal, their tools glinting in the truck's light. They moved silently, pacing alongside the rig, never blinking, never speaking, just watching. Then I realized something worse. The carvings on my logs matched the symbols etched into the tunnel walls. Each pulse of light seemed to summon another shadow, feeding off my fear. I slammed the horn repeatedly, but the sound was swallowed instantly. Panic twisted my chest. I was trapped, a passenger in my own truck, a living vessel for the haunted forest's wrath. The carvings pulsed brighter, and a low rumble began from deep inside the logs. At first, I thought it was the engine, but then I heard it. A voice, faint but unmistakable. "You shouldn't have taken this road." It echoed inside my skull rather than my ears, rattling my teeth and filling my mind with visions. Shadows twisted and danced, forming faces contorted in silent screams. Each pulse of light from the carvings revealed more figures, closer, reaching for me. I slammed my hands against the wheel, trying to wrest control, but the truck ignored me. The trees outside bent unnaturally toward the cab, their branches scraping the sides like claws. Snowflakes turned to ash, falling thickly around the rig. And then I realized the truck wasn't haunted, it was alive. It consumed fear and fed on it. Every mile I drove, it grew stronger. Every shadow, every whisper, it remembered. I screamed, but the voice from the logs whispered back, "Drive, or join them." The road rose sharply, twisting to sheer cliffs on either side. I could see nothing beyond the headlights, just darkness and jagged rock faces. The truck seemed drawn forward, hugging the edge, ignoring my desperate attempts to brake. A scream ripped through the cab, not mine, but somewhere close, reverberating off the mountains. The shadows outside twisted into nightmarish shapes, almost human, almost not. One reached a hand toward the truck as if to stop it, but it only glanced against the truck's side like it was made of steel. My chest burned, and sweat froze on my skin. Every instinct screamed that I was about to plunge into oblivion. But the truck didn't stop. It seemed to know a path I couldn't see, dodging rocks and invisible obstacles as if guided by a dark intelligence. I realized I wasn't the driver. I was a passenger in a machine that had a will of its own, a will I didn't survive crossing. When the first rays of dawn broke, the road returned to normal. The trees stopped leaning, the snow became snow again, and the carvings no longer glowed. I was back on a real highway, far from the tunnel, far from the haunted mountains. I parked at the nearest town and ran inside the diner, shaking uncontrollably. When I returned, the truck was empty. No glowing carvings, no supernatural pulse, nothing. just a normal logging truck, waiting to be loaded again. But I knew the truth. The haunted logs weren't gone, and the truck was still alive, waiting for the next driver, the next fool who dared to take it into the Appalachian Mountains. I left that job, that truck, and that road forever. Yet sometimes, at night, when the wind howls, I hear the low rumble of those carvings in my dreams, whispering, drive or join them. My name is Ronald, and I've been a long-haul trucker for over 20 years. I've seen it all: drugged hitchhikers, fake cops trying to rob drivers, even other truckers losing their minds from exhaustion. But what I picked up one night on Route 191 still haunts me. It was just past midnight. I was hauling empty flatbeds through the desert stretch of Arizona, where the road goes on forever, with nothing but scrubland and rock. That's when I spotted him, a lone figure standing under a busted streetlight. He had his thumb out, and even from a distance, something about him didn't sit right. Most truckers know better than to pick up strangers. But the desert at night has a way of getting into your head. You see someone stranded out there, you start imagining their suffering. Against my gut, I slowed down and pulled over. The man climbed in silently. He was tall, thin, wearing a tattered coat that looked far too heavy for the desert. And he never said a word. The man slid into the passenger seat without a greeting. His movements were stiff, almost mechanical, like his joints didn't quite work the way they should. I tried to break the silence. "Rough night?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. He didn't answer, just stared out the windshield. His face was pale, his lips cracked, and his eyes, at first I thought he was wearing sunglasses, but when the light from my dashboard caught them, I froze. His eyes were completely black, no whites, no irises, just endless glossy voids. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was fatigue, a trick of the light, maybe even contacts. But the longer I drove, the heavier the air inside the cab became. It felt like the oxygen was being drained away, leaving me lightheaded. Then, without turning his head, the hitchhiker whispered in a flat, broken voice, "You shouldn't have stopped." I reached for the CB radio, desperate for some kind of distraction. I clicked it on, expecting the usual chatter from other night drivers. Instead, what came through was wrong. It wasn't voices. It was static mixed with faint screams, like a recording from a distant, muffled slaughterhouse. The sound pierced through the cab. My skin broke into goose flesh. I shut it off immediately. But then, my stereo turned on by itself. A country station at first, then a warped, distorted voice crawling through the speakers. "He's not a man. Don't look at his eyes." My chest tightened, my knuckles white on the wheel. I glanced sideways. The hitchhiker hadn't moved. His head was still facing forward, but I swear I could feel his eyes, those black pits, boring into me. "Do you want to see what's on the road ahead?" he whispered again. I kept my eyes glued to the road, pretending nothing was wrong. My gut screamed to pull over, kick this thing out of my truck, but my legs felt locked in place, frozen with fear. Then, out of instinct, I glanced at the side mirror. For a split second, the reflection showed something that wasn't sitting in my passenger seat. It wasn't a man at all. It was hunched, twisted, its spine arched unnaturally high, with thin limbs bent backward like a spider crammed into human skin. I looked back. He was normal again. Or at least, as normal as a man with black, soulless eyes could be. "You saw it," he whispered, lips curling into a faint grin. His voice scratched at my ears like nails across glass. Most people pretend they don't. The temperature dropped sharply. Frost spread across the inside of the windshield, creeping in delicate patterns like skeletal fingers reaching for me. My breath fogged, and every exhale felt harder than the last. I knew then, whatever I'd let into my truck wasn't human, and it didn't just want to ride. I pressed the accelerator, hoping to outrun whatever this was. But the road ahead looked wrong. My headlights barely stretched beyond a few feet, swallowed by a darkness so thick it seemed alive. The highway signs had vanished, and the familiar lines painted on the asphalt looked distorted, bending like waves. The hitchhiker finally turned his head toward me. His face was closer than it should have been, his black eyes wide, swallowing the cab in their depthless void. "You're not on your road anymore," he said. I shook my head violently. "What the hell are you talking about?" He smiled, slowly, too slowly, as if his lips had to fight to remember how to move. "This road belongs to me now." And then I realized I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. No headlights, no taillights, nothing but my own rig swallowed in this endless stretch of nightmare. The CB radio on my dash crackled to life without me touching it. At first, it was just static, hissing, broken noise. Then, through the distortion, I heard voices. Hundreds of them. Men, women, even children, all whispering in overlapping tones that bled into each other like a chorus from the grave. "Help me. Don't stop. Turn back. You'll never leave." My stomach twisted. I reached for the volume knob, but before I could touch it, the hitchhiker slammed his hand down over mine. His skin was ice cold, brittle like glass, yet the grip was crushing. "You don't change the channel," he growled. "You listen." The voices grew louder, clearer. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were screams, agonized, ragged, full of despair. It was like every lost soul on this blackened highway was calling out through the radio, trapped somewhere beyond sight. I ripped my hand free and slammed the radio off. The cab went dead quiet. Too quiet. And when I looked at him again, he wasn't smiling anymore. He was hungry. The landscape outside my window wasn't Arizona desert anymore. It was nothing. Endless black fields stretching forever in every direction, dotted with thin, crooked shadows shaped like people frozen mid-scream. Their bodies flickered in and out, like bad reception on a dying TV. I gripped the wheel tighter, heart pounding so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. "Where the hell are we?" I shouted. The hitchhiker tilted his head, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "Closer." "Closer to what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned back, his form stretching unnaturally, like his spine was made of rubber. His head almost brushed the ceiling of my cab. His smile stretched wider and wider until it split his face into something grotesque. I pressed harder on the gas, but the speedometer needle didn't move. No matter how much I floored it, we weren't going faster. In fact, the road beneath us seemed to crawl, as if the highway itself was alive, dragging us deeper into its stomach. The temperature inside the cab plummeted. My breath came out in visible clouds, curling into icy shapes that lingered far longer than normal. The steering wheel felt slick, almost like it was coated in frost. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to get out, but the hitchhiker's gaze held me frozen. He leaned close again, whispering so softly I could barely hear. Yet every word pierced my mind like a dagger. "You're already mine." The dashboard lights flickered violently, and I could swear the mirrors reflected not me, but someone or something behind me. Shadows twisted into forms I didn't recognize. Faces screaming silently, eyes hollow, hands reaching out like they wanted to pull me in. I slammed my foot down, trying to escape this nightmare highway. But my rig moved slower than a crawl. The hitchhiker just smiled, a thin, cruel line stretching across his face. Then he placed his hand on my shoulder. Ice ran through my veins. I realized he wasn't just a passenger, he controlled everything. The world outside had completely changed. The highway had morphed into an infinite black tunnel, walls pulsating like living flesh. Shadows writhed along the edges, screaming silently. Every landmark I knew had vanished. I wasn't just lost, I was trapped in a place that shouldn't exist. The hitchhiker finally spoke in a voice that seemed to echo in my skull. Everyone who stops for me ends up here. Forever panic surged. I tried the brakes. Nothing. Tried to reverse. The truck wouldn't budge. My hands shook violently on the wheel. The shadows outside pressed closer, crawling toward the cab, bending impossibly to reach in. Then I saw them. Figures, faintly human, their eyes as black as my passengers. They floated just above the asphalt, silent, watching, waiting. And behind all of them, I saw the flicker of another shadow, a massive shape, taller than anything human, with a grin that promised endless suffering. I realized I'd been staring into their domain the entire time. I don't remember how long I drove, or if I was even moving. Everything had become a nightmare of the endless black road, whispering voices, and eyes that followed me from every shadow. Then, without warning, the hitchhiker vanished. The cab fell silent. The temperature normalized. My headlights finally caught a glimpse of something familiar. A dusty road sign. Route 191, Arizona. I was back in the real world. My rig was still intact, but my passenger seat, it was empty. No coat, no body, no trace of him ever being there. I parked at the nearest rest stop, shaking uncontrollably. I never saw him again, but sometimes, when I drive alone at night, I catch a glimpse of black eyes in my mirrors. And I know he's still out there, waiting for the next trucker brave or foolish enough to stop. I learned one thing that night. Some rides aren't worth taking, and some passengers never leave. I was driving cross-country when exhaustion forced me off the highway. Rain poured relentlessly, the kind that blurred your windshield no matter how fast your wipers moved. That's when I spotted it. A flickering neon sign half hidden by trees. Riverside Motel, vacancy. Something about the place looked wrong. The parking lot was empty except for one rusted pickup truck. The office lights glowed dimly, but there was no sound, no movement, just the buzzing of that neon sign. Against my instincts, I pulled in. Inside the office, the smell of mildew and dust hung heavy. A bell sat on the counter, so I rang it. After a long pause, a man finally appeared from the back, tall, thin, and unnaturally pale, with watery eyes that never quite blinked. He smiled in a way that felt more like a grimace. "You'll be our only guest tonight," he said. The clerk slid a worn, leather-bound ledger toward me instead of a computer. No modern systems here, just pages filled with names scratched in fading ink. Some dates went back decades, though the ink looked oddly fresh. "Sign your name," he instructed, his voice dry like he hadn't spoken all day. My pen hovered above the page. I noticed that some names were crossed out violently, leaving jagged scars in the paper. Others had no checkout dates listed. I scribbled mine quickly, eager to get the key and head to bed. He handed me an old-fashioned brass key with a faded red tag that read, "Room 6." Before I turned to leave, he added. "Keep your curtains shut. And if you hear knocking during the night, don't answer." His tone was matter-of-fact, not playful. My stomach twisted, but I forced a laugh. "Sure, no problem." As I walked out, I glanced back. He was still standing at the counter, his pale face watching me without blinking, until the office door creaked shut behind me. The motel was eerily quiet. The rain had stopped, but the silence felt heavier than before, like the world outside had been swallowed whole. Room 6 smelled faintly of damp wood and iron, like old blood. The wallpaper peeled in curling strips, revealing dark stains beneath. The carpet was threadbare, and the only furniture was a single bed, a crooked nightstand, and a dusty lamp that flickered when I turned it on. I pulled the curtains shut, remembering the clerk's warning. Oddly, there was no TV, no clock, nothing modern, just a large mirror bolted to the wall facing the bed. As I unpacked, I noticed something strange. Carved into the wooden frame of the mirror were dozens of faint scratches, as if people had tried to leave messages but stopped midway. I leaned closer, and though most were illegible, one phrase stood out, etched deep into the wood. "Don't look at it." The air in the room suddenly felt colder. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I pulled away from the mirror and crawled into bed, telling myself I just needed a few hours of sleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror wasn't just reflecting the room. It was watching me. Sleep didn't come easy. The mattress sagged like it had carried too many bodies before mine, and every creak of the springs echoed in the silence. I must have dozed off at some point, because when my eyes opened again, the lamp was off. I hadn't turned it off. A faint glow from the streetlight outside slipped through a gap in the curtains, slicing across the mirror. That was when I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp raps against the door. My breath caught. It was exactly midnight. I knew because I glanced at my phone, its battery somehow at 1% despite being nearly full earlier. I froze, the clerk's words rushing back. "If you hear knocking during the night, don't answer." The knocks came again, louder this time. Then, silence. I held my breath and listened. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I couldn't help it. Slowly, I sat up and looked toward the door. The knob was moving. It turned just enough to creak, like someone was testing it. But then, as if whoever was outside had lost interest, the knob stopped. I stayed perfectly still, my eyes darting back to the mirror. That's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. In the reflection, the curtains were open. But in reality, I knew I had shut them tight. My throat went dry as I stared at the mirror. The reflection showed my bed, the door, the nightstand, everything. But the curtains were parted, and moonlight spilled through. Worse, there was something else. A figure, tall, thin, standing just inside the open curtains, its face completely in shadow. I whipped my head toward the actual window. The curtains were shut, exactly as I'd left them. Nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was closer, now standing right behind my bed. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the nightstand. My pulse raced. I couldn't look away from the reflection. Every instinct screamed at me not to. But the figure kept inching closer in the glass, even though the room around me was empty. Then came the whisper. Faint at first, like someone breathing into my ear. "Open the door." I spun around. Nothing but silence. When I faced the mirror again, the figure's head was bent low, its shadowed face only inches behind my reflected shoulder. And then, knock, knock, knock. This time, the sound didn't come from the door. It came from inside the mirror. The knocks inside the mirror echoed like hollow bones. My entire body stiffened, every hair standing on end. I wanted to scream, but the sound lodged in my throat, strangled by fear. The mirror's surface rippled, just slightly, like water disturbed by a pebble. My reflection blurred for a moment, and then cleared. But I wasn't alone in it anymore. The figure had stepped forward, its head tilted unnaturally, the way a puppet might move when its strings are pulled wrong. I couldn't see its face. It was just a hollow darkness. But its hand pressed against the inside of the glass. The sound of its tapping against the barrier was softer now, more deliberate, like it was feeling for a weak spot. I backed toward the door, fumbling for my phone, but the screen was dead. The battery had finally given up. I was cut off. The whisper came again, stronger this time, vibrating through the air. "Open the door." Only now, I realized it wasn't the motel room door it wanted me to open. It was the mirror. I couldn't look away. My chest tightened, panic flooding me as the figure pressed both hands against the glass. With a sharp crack, a thin fracture ran across the surface, spiderwebbing outward. I gasped. And that was when the lamp flickered back on, flooding the room with yellow light. The mirror was normal again. My reflection, just me, staring back, pale and shaking. Had I imagined it? I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to. But deep down, I knew better. The rest of the night was a blur of shallow breaths and desperate prayers. I sat on the edge of the bed, refusing to close my eyes, staring at the mirror like it was a live bomb waiting to go off. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hall. Slow, dragging. They stopped outside my door. The knob jiggled again. Not tentative this time, forceful, rattling. My heart hammered. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't giving up. And then came the voice. Not the whisper from the mirror, but a deep, broken rasp. "Let me in." I froze. It wasn't just outside. It was everywhere. The air, the walls, inside my skull. I pressed my back against the door to hold it shut. But as I did, the mirror across the room flickered. For a split second, I saw the curtains open again. And standing outside the window, pressed against the glass, was the same tall figure. This time, it wasn't confined to the reflection. I stumbled backward, torn between the door and the window. Both felt like they were seconds away from giving in. That's when I realized the sound of the knob had stopped. I turned, slowly, my stomach dropping. The door was cracked open, just an inch. And from the dark gap, a hand was reaching through. The pale hand stretched through the gap in the door, its fingers impossibly long, curling and flexing like they were feeling for me. The skin wasn't right. It looked damp, translucent, as though stretched over something that wasn't quite human. I stumbled backward, slamming into the nightstand. The lamp flickered violently, plunging the room in and out of light. With every flicker, the hand moved further inside. First the wrist, then the forearm. It was pulling itself through a space no person could fit through. The whispering returned, louder than ever, but it was layered now. Multiple voices overlapping, male and female, young and old, all speaking at once. "Open. Let us in. We're waiting." I grabbed the only weapon I had, a heavy glass ashtray, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening crack. And that's when I realized my mistake. The reflection didn't shatter. Instead, the thing inside the mirror grinned, a wide, black maw of teeth. And the lights went out. The darkness was alive. I could feel it, pressing against my skin like cold water. The air thickened, making every breath a battle. The door creaked open wider, though I never saw anyone push it. The hand was gone, but now the doorway was nothing but black void, swallowing the hallway beyond. From the mirror came the sound of breathing, heavy, labored, not mine. And then, the motel room shifted. The floorboards beneath me warped, stretching like rubber. The wallpaper peeled in strips, curling like burned paper. The bed frame bent at impossible angles, springs groaning. I stumbled toward the window, desperate for an escape. But when I tore the curtains open, I froze. Outside wasn't the parking lot. It was endless darkness with faint shapes moving in it. Shapes with too many limbs. I pressed against the glass, panic rising, but the reflection trapped me again. I wasn't staring at myself anymore. It was me, but standing outside. My double pressed its forehead against the glass, smiling with dead eyes. And behind it, dozens of figures loomed. The mirror cracked again, jagged lines crawling across the surface like veins. From each fracture, a whisper leaked out, until the room was filled with the sound of hundreds of voices, murmuring in unison. The doppelganger in the reflection lifted its hand and pressed it to the glass. My body moved against my will, my hand rising to meet it. No matter how much I fought, it was like invisible strings were pulling me forward. The cold surface touched my palm, and suddenly, the room was gone. I was standing in a long, endless corridor lined with mirrors on both sides. Each one contained a version of me, but not quite right. Some had faces too long, jaws unhinged, eyes hollow. Some had no mouths at all, just black holes where their features should have been. They all stared at me, and they all smiled. The voices whispered in perfect unison now. You checked in. You don't check out. The last thing I felt was dozens of hands reaching through the mirrors, pulling me apart. Back at the motel, the room was silent again. The lights buzzed faintly. The mirror reflected nothing at all. The silent motel had claimed another guest. My name is Ethan, and I've been trucking for over 15 years. I've seen my share of strange nights, animals darting across highways, drunk drivers swerving into my lane, even tornadoes twisting in the distance. But nothing prepared me for what I saw on Highway 281 one stormy night. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer loaded with produce from Oklahoma down into Texas. The rain had been coming down in sheets, hammering against the windshield, making every mile feel twice as long. Around 12:30 a.m., I pulled into a rest stop just south of Wichita Falls. Most of the lot was empty, just a couple of semis idling in the back and an old sedan parked near the entrance. I grabbed a coffee from the vending machine, stretched my legs, and headed back to the cab. That's when I noticed him. A man stood near the edge of the parking lot, half hidden under the flickering light. His clothes were soaked, plastered to his body, and he had one arm outstretched, thumb pointing toward the highway, a hitchhiker, at midnight, in the middle of nowhere. I froze for a second, staring at the man. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't even shiver despite being drenched to the bone. He just stood there with his thumb out, face shadowed under the light. Now, every trucker knows the rule. Never pick up hitchhikers at night. Too many horror stories, muggings, scams, people vanishing. But something about him felt wrong. Not threatening exactly, but unsettling, like he wasn't supposed to be there. I shook it off, climbed into my cab, and fired up the engine. As I pulled onto the highway, the rain intensified. Lightning lit up the road, casting shadows across the wet pavement. That's when my headlights caught movement up ahead. I slammed the brakes so hard my coffee spilled across the dash. There he was, the same hitchhiker, standing dead center in my lane, arm out, thumb raised, rain dripping off his soaked hair. But that was impossible. The rest stop was a good 5 miles behind me. My heart nearly stopped as I gripped the steering wheel. I laid on the horn, the blaring sound cutting through the storm. But the hitchhiker didn't flinch. He just stood there, unmoving, arm raised like a mannequin. I swerved hard to the right, the trailer fishtailing as I barely avoided him. My tires screeched on the slick asphalt, and for a split second, I thought I was going to jackknife. Somehow, I regained control, the truck straightening out as I gasped for air. I glanced into my mirrors, expecting to see his body sprawled on the pavement. But the road behind me was empty. No figure, no body, nothing. The adrenaline left my hands trembling. I muttered, "Jesus Christ," and tried to calm down. Maybe it was the storm messing with my eyes. Maybe fatigue. But deep down, I knew what I saw was real. Too real. As I pressed on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped him, that he was still out there, waiting. 30 minutes later, I had the wipers going full speed and the heater blasting to dry my soaked jacket. The storm showed no signs of letting up. That's when the CB crackled to life. "Breaker, breaker. Anyone southbound 281, you catch that hitchhiker?" I froze. The voice was raspy, shaken. Another driver had seen him. I grabbed the mic. "Yeah, I saw him. Back near Wichita Falls. Damn near stood in front of my rig." A pause. Then the driver replied, "That's the same son of a bitch I saw near Bowie. Just standing there. Ain't natural." Gave me the creeps before I could respond. A third voice cut in. Low, distorted, almost like a whisper. "He rides the storm." The channel went dead. Static filled the cab. I stared at the radio, chills running down my spine. Whoever that third voice belonged to, it didn't sound like any trucker I'd ever heard. I pulled into a narrow stretch of highway, trees crowding both sides like looming shadows. My headlights carved tunnels through the rain, and every shape in the dark looked like a figure waiting to step into the road. That's when I felt it. The subtle shift of weight. The creak of leather. Someone was in the passenger seat. Slowly, I turned my head. My stomach dropped. It was the hitchhiker. Soaked clothes dripping onto the floor mat, head tilted slightly towards me, eyes hidden under wet strands of hair. He didn't say a word. Just sat there, hands still raised, as if his thumb was waiting for a ride. I nearly lost control of the truck. "What the hell?" I shouted, slamming the brakes. But when I blinked, the seat was empty. No puddle of water, no trace of anyone ever being there. Only the faint smell of wet earth lingered in the cab. I pulled into a lonely gas station just outside of Denton, needing to get out of the cab before I lost my mind. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the air still smelled of damp asphalt and ozone. Inside, the station was nearly empty. A single clerk sat behind the counter, a wiry old man with sunken eyes and a cigarette dangling from his lips. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he muttered as I approached with a coffee. I almost laughed. "Something like that." When I told him about the hitchhiker, his face went pale. The cigarette trembled in his hand before he stubbed it out. "You need to get off this road," he whispered. "He's been out there for decades. Drivers see him when the storms come. Some pick him up. They don't make it to their destination." I swallowed hard. "What happens to them?" He shook his head slowly. "Bodies never found, trucks abandoned, like they just vanished into the night. Back on the road, I couldn't stop replaying the old man's words. They don't make it to their destination. My grip tightened on the wheel. I was determined not to be one of them. But the storm returned, worse than before. Sheets of rain pounded the windshield, and lightning split the sky like jagged cracks in black glass. The highway narrowed into a 2-lane stretch with no shoulders, hemmed in by thick forest. My headlights barely pierced the downpour, and every gust of wind rocked the trailer. And then I saw him again. The hitchhiker stood on the side of the road, thumb raised. This time, as my headlights swept across him, his head snapped toward me. His face was pale, his lips blue, eyes glowing faintly like dying embers. I pressed harder on the gas. My engine roared. But when I checked my mirrors, he wasn't behind me. He was in the middle of the lane again. Panic surged through me. I slammed the accelerator, the truck trembling as it pushed past 70 on the slick road. The rain blurred my vision, wipers useless against the torrent. Then, a thud. A heavy impact against the trailer, like something climbing onto it. My stomach twisted. I leaned forward, straining to see through the mirrors. For a second, I caught a glimpse. A soaked figure clinging to the trailer, his hair whipping in the wind, face plastered against the side. I swerved, trying to shake him, but the weight stayed. The sound of dragging footsteps on steel echoed through the storm, louder and louder. Then, silence. My cab lights flickered. The radio hissed, and from the sleeper behind me, I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Someone, or something, was inside. I forced myself to look back. The sleeper was dark, shadows shifting with every flash of lightning. My breath came in ragged gasps, my hands clammy on the wheel. "Who's there?" I shouted, voice cracking. No answer, just the creak of the mattress, as if someone had just sat down. My instincts screamed at me to stop, to get out, to run. But I knew stepping out onto that road meant facing him again in the storm. I flicked the cabin light on, empty, but the mattress was soaked. Water pooled in the seams, and written in the condensation on the window above the bed were 3 words, smeared by a dripping finger. "Ride with me." I jerked forward, heart hammering, and killed the light. The next thing I heard was laughter. Low, guttural, rising from the sleeper. By the time I reached the Red River Bridge, I was a wreck. My eyes burned, hands numb, chest tight with terror. The storm seemed to ease, as if the hitchhiker had finally gotten what he wanted. The road stretched ahead, calm, almost peaceful. That's when he appeared one last time, standing in the middle of the bridge. I couldn't stop. My rig roared forward, headlights cutting through him like smoke. He didn't move, didn't flinch. For a moment, the cab filled with icy cold. My breath crystallized in the air. And in the reflection of my windshield, I saw him sitting in the passenger seat again. Only this time, he was smiling. I don't remember crossing the rest of that bridge. When I came to, my truck was parked on the shoulder. The road behind me was empty. But to this day, whenever the storms roll in, I swear I see him standing in the rain, waiting for another ride. The rain poured heavily as I pulled off the deserted highway and into the parking lot of a small-town motel. Its neon sign flickered weakly. Rooms available, buzzing like an insect trapped in a jar. I'd been driving for hours, and exhaustion weighed heavily on me. Inside, the lobby smelled of mildew and stale cigarettes. The old man behind the counter barely spoke, only slid a key across the counter without looking at me. His eyes blank, yet oddly watchful, as if he knew something I didn't. Room 6 was mine for the night. The corridor leading to it was dim, the carpet damp and stained with marks I couldn't identify. As I slid the key into the lock, I had this sudden, gnawing feeling that I wasn't alone. The air grew colder. My reflection in the window seemed a second slower than me, almost like it was waiting. And then, from the far end of the corridor, I thought I saw it. A shadowy figure standing perfectly still, darker than the surrounding night. But when I blinked, it was gone. Inside, the motel room was worse than I expected. The wallpaper peeled like dead skin, and the carpet smelled faintly of rot. A single dim lamp buzzed in the corner, casting a weak yellow glow that made the shadows look deeper, heavier. I set my bag on the bed, but the mattress sagged as though someone had been lying there just seconds before. For a moment, I froze. Wasn't this room supposed to be empty? I tried brushing it off as paranoia, but then I noticed something disturbing. The mirror above the dresser was cracked down the middle, and my reflection didn't line up correctly. My face looked distorted, smiling faintly, though my lips were not. The hairs on my neck rose. I turned quickly toward the door. Nothing. Silence. But from the bathroom, I swore I heard the slow drip of water, even though I hadn't turned on the tap. The shadow was closer. The bathroom door creaked open on its own, revealing nothing but darkness inside. The dripping sound grew louder, echoing unnaturally, as if the small space were much bigger than it really was. I fumbled for the light switch, but the bulb above the mirror only flickered weakly before dying completely, leaving me in pitch black. The smell hit me next. Damp, moldy, mixed with something metallic. Blood. I could barely make out the porcelain sink in the dark, but what made my stomach turn was the faint outline of handprints smeared in something dark along the bathroom tiles. Long fingers dragging downward. The dripping sound was no longer just water. Each drop echoed heavy and wet, like it carried weight. And then I heard it. A voice, low, hoarse, almost a whisper. "You shouldn't have come here." I froze, heart hammering in my chest. My reflection, or something pretending to be me, shifted inside the cracked mirror, even though I hadn't moved. I couldn't tear my eyes from the cracked mirror. My reflection, it wasn't me anymore. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, bones seeming to bend and stretch beneath pale skin. The reflection's eyes were sunk deep into black sockets, yet it smiled. A wide, jagged grin that didn't belong to my face. I staggered backward, nearly tripping over the damp floor mat. My hands trembled as I reached for the doorknob to get out of the bathroom. But the metal knob was ice cold. Colder than anything I'd ever felt. And then the reflection moved on its own. It pressed its hands against the inside of the mirror, as if the glass was the only barrier between us. Long, shadow-like fingers dragged down the glass with a screeching sound, leaving black streaks. Suddenly, the bathroom door slammed shut behind me. The whispering started again, closer, all around me now. "Stay, stay, stay." The lights above me flickered back to life for just a second, and in that moment, I saw it clearly. A tall, shadowy figure stood behind me. I froze. My body refused to move, even though my mind screamed at me to run. In the mirror, the shadow figure loomed taller than the doorway, its head brushing the ceiling, its body shifting like smoke held in human shape. But when I whipped around to face it, there was nothing. Just the faint smell of mildew and the rickety bathroom walls. My breath came out in sharp bursts. "It's in my head. It's just in my head," I told myself. But then, the mirror's surface began to ripple like disturbed water, and the figure stepped through. The air dropped 10 degrees in an instant. The thing towered over me, its face a hollow void, turning downward until it was inches from mine. The whispering grew louder, vibrating in my skull until it felt like my brain would split open. I scrambled toward the bathroom door, pounding on it with my fists. But the knob wouldn't budge, locked tight. The shadow moved closer, stretching its hand toward my chest. And that's when the lights died completely, plunging me into total blackness. The darkness wasn't empty. It was alive. I could hear it moving, not footsteps, but a slithering shuffle, as though the shadow itself was crawling across the walls. Something cold brushed against my arm. I jerked back, but it caught me, long, bony fingers wrapping around my wrist. The grip was icy, yet it burned like fire under my skin. I screamed, yanking and twisting, but the thing was impossibly strong. It dragged my arm upward until I could feel the sharp edge of its claws grazing over my chest, right above my heart. Then came the voice, this time clear, deep, and impossibly layered, like 1,000 people speaking at once. You, stay. My knees buckled as the force of it rattled my bones. I slammed against the bathroom sink, breaking the porcelain, my blood mixing with the icy water that sprayed out. Through the pitch black, 2 red orbs flared open, inches from my face. I couldn't look away. I couldn't even breathe. I thought I was about to die. That's when the pounding started again, this time from the hallway outside my room. The pounding grew louder, shaking the thin motel walls. For a moment, I thought it was the front desk clerk, or maybe another guest who had heard my screams. "Hey, you okay in there?" a man's voice yelled. The grip on my wrist tightened until I felt bones grind together. The shadow hissed, a low rattling sound that rose from the floor and ceiling at once. Then it snapped its head toward the door, those burning red eyes glowing brighter. "Don't let them in." The voice crawled inside my head. My body jerked on its own. I suddenly found myself moving toward the door, even as I screamed inside my skull to stop. I was being controlled, like a puppet. The man outside began ramming the door with his shoulder. The frame cracked, the lock whining. My hand, still not under my control, reached for the bolt, trying to keep it closed. Behind me, the shadow loomed taller, stretching, its form pressing against the ceiling like a mass of smoke and claws. And then the door splintered open. The hallway light spilled in, cutting through the dark like a blade. The shadow screamed. The door flew wide open, and a man burst inside. A middle-aged traveler with a thick jacket and a crowbar clutched in his hand. His eyes darted across the room and landed on me, my arm twisted unnaturally toward the door, my body shaking under the grip of something he couldn't see. "What the hell's going on?" he shouted. I tried to scream, to tell him to run, but the shadow's claws gripped tighter, muffling the words in my throat. The man swung the crowbar wildly into the room, smashing the side table lamp. The bulb shattered, and in that momentary flicker of light, the shadow shrieked again, recoiling like smoke caught in wind. The hold on me loosened. I fell to my knees, gasping. "Get up! We gotta go!" the man barked. But the hallway behind him grew darker, unnaturally darker, as if night itself was crawling into the motel. The shadow was not leaving. It was spreading. The man grabbed my arm and yanked me to my feet. We stumbled into the hallway, but the air was thick, heavy, almost liquid. The motel corridor stretched longer than it should have, every flickering bulb casting grotesque shadows that twisted and writhed. "Don't stop moving," he shouted, dragging me toward the exit sign at the far end. Behind us, the shadow followed, no longer confined to a shape, but now a tide of blackness, clawing at the walls, melting the carpet beneath it. A chorus of whispers filled the air, dozens of voices overlapping. Stay with us forever. We pushed through the suffocating dark, our feet dragging like the floor itself was trying to hold us back. The exit sign glowed faintly, the only beacon in the endless tunnel of horror. Just as we reached the final door, the man raised his crowbar and smashed the push bar open. The cold night air rushed in. Relief washed over me, until I realized the parking lot was empty. My car, the man's truck, even the road itself, gone. Only a vast, endless field of black fog stretched ahead. We stood frozen at the threshold, staring into the void. The man swore under his breath, gripping the crowbar like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. "This ain't right," he muttered. Behind us, the motel seemed to dissolve into the fog, each door and wall peeling away into black nothingness. The shadow's whispers rose into a deafening roar. "You can't leave. You're already ours," I screamed, stumbling forward into the fog. The man followed. But the moment we crossed the threshold, the ground vanished. I was falling, plunging through endless darkness, air whipping past me, my voice lost in the void. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the motel room. The digital clock read 3 a.m. The sheets were damp with sweat. The door was locked. No man. No broken furniture, no crowbar. But burned into the inside of my wrist was a deep, black handprint. I checked out the next morning without a word. The desk clerk looked at me strangely and said, "Sir, this motel has been closed for 30 years. Every trucker has their own set of rules for the road. Mine were simple. Never stop on back roads. Never pick up hitchhikers. And above all, never pull into a rest stop after midnight. That last one wasn't superstition. It was survival. But one night, exhaustion got the better of me. My eyelids sagged, and the white lines on the highway blurred like ghostly threads pulling me under. I needed coffee. A bathroom. Just 5 minutes of solid ground before I drifted off behind the wheel. So, when the faded green sign appeared, "Rest Area 1 mile," I broke my own rule. The place looked abandoned even before I pulled in. A cracked asphalt lot, fluorescent lights flickering weakly, buzzing like angry insects. Only 2 other vehicles sat scattered across the lot. A rusted sedan with no plates and an old RV that looked like it hadn't moved in decades. The moment I cut the engine, the silence hit me. No chirping crickets, no distant highway hum, just a dead stillness, thick enough to choke on. I told myself it was fine. Just grab coffee from the vending machine, hit the bathroom, and get back on the road. Easy. But as I stepped out, gravel crunching beneath my boots, I noticed something. The sedan's windows were fogged on the inside, and there were handprints smeared across the glass. I froze beside my rig, staring at the sedan. The handprints weren't neat. They dragged downward, streaking the condensation, as though someone had clawed their way across the glass in panic. I swallowed hard, convincing myself it was kids fooling around. Teens parked out here to make out, maybe prank strangers. But then I saw it. On the rear window, a single handprint was pressed flat against the glass. Larger than the others, too large, and smeared in something darker than condensation. I felt my stomach twist. A light snapped on inside the restroom building, a sharp yellow glow flickering through the grimy windows. That shouldn't have been possible. The place had looked deserted. Still, I forced myself toward the building, the hum of the vending machine luring me like bait. As I walked past the RV, I noticed something else. Its door was slightly ajar, not open enough to see inside. Just cracked, like it was waiting for someone. I sped up, my boots striking the pavement too loud in the silence. When I reached the bathroom entrance, I hesitated. The smell hit me first, damp, metallic, like rust or blood. The light overhead buzzed, dimming in and out. And faintly, from inside the tiled room, I heard it. The sound of someone whispering my name. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. My name wasn't common. How the hell would anyone out here know it? The lot was still. My truck loomed in the distance, the sedan's fogged windows staring back at me like blind eyes. I told myself I imagined it. Lack of sleep, brain playing tricks. I shoved the restroom door open anyway, the hinges groaning. Inside, the place was worse than I imagined. Cracked tiles, graffiti smeared across the walls, a single flickering bulb dangling overhead, swinging slightly as though disturbed moments before. I stepped inside. My boots echoed against the hollow room. The stalls were shut, all three of them. The mirrors above the sinks were cracked, reflecting fractured versions of my face. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, from the last stall. I froze, every hair on my body rising. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky, echoing too loudly in the empty space. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in again, suffocating. Then, one of the stall doors creaked open an inch, and through the gap, I saw an eye. Not human, not animal, just black, glossy, reflecting me like a void. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own boots. That eye followed me, unblinking. Then, the stall door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The bulb above me flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness before sputtering back to life. That was it. I was done. I bolted out of the restroom, lungs burning, ears ringing with my own pulse. The lot was different now, or maybe I was seeing it clearer. The RV's door was open wider, swinging slightly like something had just stepped out. The sedan's windows were completely clear now, no fog, no handprints, but the car was empty. I didn't even realize I'd started backing up until I nearly tripped over the curb. My truck was my only sanctuary, towering in the distance. I sprinted for it. Halfway there, movement caught my eye. A figure stood beneath one of the broken lights. Tall, gaunt, clothes hanging loose as if draped over bones. Its head tilted unnaturally to the side, watching me. And though the distance was too great, I swear I heard it. The same whisper as before, calling my name. I bolted, my boots pounding against the pavement, breath tearing in and out like knives. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My truck loomed closer, safe, familiar. I yanked the door open, scrambled inside and slammed the locks. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the keys. That's when I saw it. In the rearview mirror, the gaunt figure was closer, much closer, standing in the center of the lot, head tilted the other way now. Its lips moved, but the whisper wasn't outside. It was inside the cab with me. I screamed, twisting the key. The engine roared to life, but my headlights caught something. The RV door was wide open now, and inside, shapes moved. Dozens of them. Shadows spilling out like smoke, all with those same glossy black eyes. They weren't rushing. They weren't running. They were waiting. I floored the gas, my 18-wheeler lurching forward with a roar. The lot blurred past, headlights cutting through the suffocating darkness. But as I tore down the exit ramp, something was wrong. The road was different. The highway should have been right there. Instead, The ramp seemed to stretch on endlessly, twisting into a black tunnel of trees. My headlights barely pierced it. Panic surged. I checked my mirrors. Shadows streaked across the lot, spilling toward the ramp like liquid night. The gaunt figure stood at the mouth of the ramp, watching me vanish into the void. The whispers filled the cab, louder now. Overlapping voices, all chanting my name in perfect unison. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles cracked. And then, screams. Not mine, not from the radio, from the passenger seat. I whipped my head. The seat was filled. A woman sat there, skin pale and waxy, eyes black as pitch. Her lips peeled back into a broken smile. "Drive," she hissed. I nearly lost control of the wheel, swerving as my rig thundered through the tunnel of trees. My chest felt crushed, lungs refusing to work. The woman didn't move. She just sat there, head twitching slightly with every bump, those eyes swallowing me whole. "Where are we going?" I choked out, my voice cracking. Her smile widened, skin stretching like it would tear. "Home." Branches scraped the sides of my truck like skeletal fingers. My GPS flickered, then died completely. The dash lights sputtered and went black. The only glow came from the headlights and her eyes. The road bent sharply. I wrestled the wheel, tires squealing. The trees parted just enough to reveal something ahead. Another rest stop, identical. Same cracked asphalt, same flickering lights, same sedan, same RV. It was like I'd never left. The woman leaned closer, her breath ice against my ear. "You can't leave," she whispered. "Not after midnight." I slammed the brakes, tires screeching against the asphalt. The truck skidded sideways, cab rattling violently before I came to a halt in the middle of the lot. The woman was gone, but the sedan's headlights flicked on by themselves, bright, blinding. The RV door banged shut. The whispers surged again, echoing across the empty lot. A chorus of voices chanting my name, drowning out every thought. I slammed the shifter, desperate to escape. But the truck wouldn't move. The engine roared, but it felt like invisible chains held me in place. And then, movement. Figures spilled out from the bathroom building, gaunt, hollow, twitching with every step. Their faces blurred, shifting in and out of focus. But their eyes remained constant. Glossy, black, they spread out, circling my rig like predators. I slammed my fists against the wheel, screaming. That's when one climbed onto the hood, pressing its face against the glass. It was me. My face. But its eyes were black. I lost it. I floored the gas, tires screaming, engine howling like a beast unleashed. Somehow, whatever held me snapped, and the truck lunged forward, ramming the figure off the hood. The gaunt thing scattered, shrieking in a pitch that rattled my skull. I didn't care. I aimed straight for the exit, praying the road would lead back to reality. The lot vanished behind me. The tunnel of trees opened. And suddenly, I was back on the highway. Just like that. My dashboard lights flickered back to life. The radio blared static before settling on some country station. My GPS relit, showing me exactly where I should be. I glanced at the clock. 3:07 a.m. Relief washed over me in a tidal wave. My breathing slowed. My grip on the wheel loosened. But then, from the sleeper cab behind me, came the sound of someone shifting. Slow, heavy. I didn't turn. I couldn't. A whisper slithered out from the darkness. "You made it home." I forced myself to look in the rearview mirror. Two eyes stared back. Black, glossy, smiling. The woman was there again, sitting upright in the sleeper, her head tilted, lips curling. "You broke the rule," she whispered. "You stopped after midnight. Now you'll never drive alone again." My chest tightened, my vision blurred. But the road stretched on endlessly, mile after mile, headlights cutting into the dark. I don't remember the rest of the drive, only that when the sun rose, I was parked at a truck stop miles away, engine cold, fuel tank empty. The lot was full of life. Other truckers, families, kids running around. Normal, safe. But when I stepped out, something was wrong. My truck's windows were fogged, handprints smeared across the glass, and faintly, from the sleeper behind me, I heard breathing. Slow, steady, waiting. I've never stopped at a rest area since. But sometimes, when the night is quiet, I hear her whispering from the back of my cab, and I know I'll never really be alone. My name's Alex, and I've been a trucker for 15 years. I've seen all sorts of things out on the highway. Wrecks, breakdowns, storms that turn the world sideways. But nothing compares to the night I picked up a hitchhiker on a back road in Kentucky. It was pouring rain, the kind that turns the windshield into a blur no matter how high you crank the wipers. My route had been rerouted because of a rock slide on the main interstate. So I was crawling through a 2-lane highway that wound through thick, dark woods. No lights, no towns, just rain hammering the cab. That's when I saw her. A young woman, drenched head to toe, standing on the shoulder with her thumb out. She looked maybe mid-20s, hair plastered against her face, wearing an old-fashioned white dress that clung to her skin like it was painted on. Something about her felt wrong, but leaving someone in that weather felt even worse. I pulled over, leaned across, and opened the passenger door. "Hop in before you drown," I shouted over the storm. She climbed up without a word. The moment the doors shut, the air inside the cab felt heavier, colder. I told myself it was just the rain. But deep down, I knew better. She sat there, dripping water onto the floor mat, hands folded neatly in her lap. I expected her to shiver or rub her arms for warmth, but she just sat still. Too still. Her head tilted slightly, and in the dim glow of the dashboard, I noticed her eyes. They weren't looking at me, not at the windshield, not at anything. They stared blankly forward, unblinking, as though she wasn't entirely there. Trying to break the silence, I asked, "Rough night to be out walking. Where are you headed?" Her lips parted, but what came out wasn't an answer. Just one word, whispered like the hiss of the rain outside. "Home." The way she said it made my skin crawl. No name, no town, just home. I pushed down my unease and focused on the road. The wipers slapped back and forth, hypnotic, but every so often I glanced sideways at her. She never moved. Her dress clung to her thin frame and water pooled at her feet, but she didn't seem to notice. Then, without turning her head, she whispered again. "It's not far." The words sank into me like ice, because I hadn't asked her where home was. The storm outside roared, but inside the cab, the silence felt heavier than the rain. I tightened my grip on the wheel and pressed on. The road twisted through dense trees, and every turn looked identical, swallowing the truck in shadow. I tried again, forcing my voice to sound casual. "So, where's home?" "Town nearby." Slowly, her head turned, like her neck creaked on rusty hinges. Her eyes, pale and glassy, locked onto mine. For a second, I almost swerved. "In the woods," she said softly. I swallowed. There weren't any houses for miles, and definitely nothing but endless forest. My gut twisted. "Look," I muttered, trying to mask my unease. "I can drop you at the next gas station. You can call someone." Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You'll see." The words lingered, low and certain. I didn't like the way she said them, like a promise. The rain intensified, hammering the roof until it sounded like fists pounding. I turned the radio knob, hoping for static, anything. But the speakers only let out a faint hiss that almost sounded like whispering voices. The girl tilted her head again. "They're calling me." By then, every instinct screamed at me to kick her out. But something about her, fragile, almost childlike, made it impossible. Against my better judgment, I kept driving. The trees blurred past, branches bending under the storm's weight. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating her face for a split second. Her skin looked gray, like something drained of life. I hit the brakes harder than I should have. The truck skidded slightly before straightening out. My breath came fast. She didn't react, didn't blink. "You all right?" I asked, though my throat felt tight. Her gaze dropped slowly to her lap. Her fingers moved, tracing invisible shapes in the wet fabric of her dress. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "They left me there." I frowned. "Who did?" She raised her head. "My family." The way she said it sent a chill straight through me. Her tone wasn't bitter. It was final, like a death sentence. The road curved sharply ahead, and for a moment, I thought I saw lights. Maybe a house, salvation. But when I rounded the bend, there was nothing but black forest. Her whisper broke the silence again. "We're close." The storm swallowed the world outside. My hands ached from gripping the wheel, but I didn't dare slow down. Every few seconds, I caught her reflection in the windshield. Face pale, eyes vacant. Then she did something that froze my blood. She leaned forward, placing a hand on the dashboard. Her skin looked almost translucent in the dim glow. Her nails were cracked, darkened with dirt. "You should turn here," she whispered. I blinked. There was no turn, just thick forest and an unbroken wall of trees. "Turn where?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her hand moved in a slow, deliberate circle on the dash. "Home." Lightning split the sky again, and for just an instant, I saw something impossible reflected in the glass. Not her face, but dozens of faces. Pale, hollow-eyed, pressed against the window as if outside, staring in. I gasped and slammed on the brakes. The truck lurched violently, tires screeching against wet asphalt. My heart hammered as I glanced back. Nothing. Just rain. Just trees. The girl sat back calmly, her hand folding once more in her lap. Almost there, I should have kicked her out then and there. But instead, I pressed the gas, heart pounding. She didn't look at me anymore. She stared out the passenger window as if watching something moving in the trees. My skin prickled. I forced myself to speak. "What happened to you?" For the first time, she smiled. Wide, teeth slightly too sharp, too many. "They left me in the rain," she whispered, "and I never found my way back." A tremor ran down my spine. She wasn't human. She couldn't be. The radio crackled suddenly, loud enough to make me jump. A man's voice hissed through the static, repeating the same phrase over and over. "Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop." I stared at the speakers, frozen. The girl tilted her head toward me again. Her smile stretched unnaturally. Too late. And then I felt it. The truck slowing, not because of my foot, but as if something pressed against the cab, dragging me down. Panic surged. I slammed my foot on the gas, but the truck crawled like it was pushing against a wall of water. The engine whined, the tires spun, yet forward motion felt impossible. The girl's head turned slowly, eyes now pitch black, pupils swallowed in void. "Here," she whispered. Through the blur of rain, I saw it. An opening in the trees. Not a road, but a gap, as though the forest itself had been split. Darkness poured from it, thicker than the shadow. The truck veered on its own, steering wheel wrenching in my hands. "No," I shouted, fighting it. The girl leaned closer, her wet hair brushing my arm. "You promised to take me home." Her words weren't a request, they were a command. The cab filled with the smell of earth, rot, and stagnant water. My vision swam. The headlights cut into the trees, but the gap ahead only grew wider, darker, like a mouth waiting to swallow us whole. My hand slipped on the wheel, my knuckles raw from fighting it. The truck howled as though it were alive, dragged toward that impossible void. "Stop!" I shouted at her, though my voice broke with terror. She only laughed. Not a normal laugh, low, hollow, echoing, like multiple voices spilling out at once. Lightning flashed, and in that instant, the gap ahead revealed more than trees. Faces, dozens, hundreds, twisted, pale, pressed into the bark like they'd grown there. Their mouths moved in silence, all mouthing the same word: home. The girl's laughter cut off, replaced with a whisper. "You're part of it now." Desperation took over. I yanked the wheel hard and slammed my foot down. Tires screamed against the slick road, the truck fishtailing violently. For a moment, I thought I'd lose control. But somehow, by some miracle, it straightened, lurching forward. I didn't look at her, didn't breathe, just drove, praying the road would carry me away. When I finally dared to look, the passenger seat was empty. Water dripped onto the floor mat, the only sign she'd ever been there. My chest heaved as I pressed the pedal harder, desperate to outrun the storm. But the silence was worse than her presence. The radio hissed faintly, then crackled back to life with that same whisper. "Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop." I drove until the storm broke, until the clouds thinned and moonlight finally pierced the forest. Hours passed before I reached a truck stop, collapsing into the lot like a drowning man breaking the surface. I sat there, trembling, staring at the empty passenger seat. That's when I noticed it. The seatbelt was buckled. The roads of America hold more than asphalt and mileage. They hold secrets, shadows, and horrors that most of us will never see. Tonight, we've traveled through 10 of the most disturbing true trucker horror stories, witnessing the impossible, the unexplainable, and the nightmarish events that haunt the highways. From ghostly convoys that stalk the foggy Appalachian backroads to shadowy figures creeping in abandoned rest stops. These stories remind us that some journeys are far more dangerous than they seem. The terrifying encounters shared by these truckers are proof that sometimes the most chilling threats aren't on the road ahead. They're riding right beside you. If these tales have sent shivers down your spine, remember, the highways never sleep, and neither do the nightmares that dwell within them. Stay alert, respect the unknown, and never travel alone on those lonely roads after dark. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.